Good morning. It's my pleasure to present to you my INDS project in organizational culture and disaster response, titled Disaster Response in a New Light. And before I begin, I'd actually like to take a moment to thank the entire INDS staff. I think at some point, every member of the team had some sort of influence on my project or advice to give, and I think that I wouldn't have been able to accomplish it without them. Specifically, I'd like to thank Dr. Freeland as my advisor and the director of the INDS department, and my staff mentors, Commander Kozlowski and Dr. Taylor. Their unique insights and perspectives really helped to drive this project forward and turn it into what it was. So thank you very much. So to begin, I wanted to start by asking everybody to imagine themselves on vacation on a beautiful tropical beach somewhere and enjoying your favorite summertime beverage, which I think after the past year we've all had, it's probably not much of a stretch. But now I wanted you to stop and think for a moment what you would do if all of a sudden you're standing on this beach and a 30-foot tall wall of water came over the horizon and was threatening to destroy everything around you. And this is exactly what happened in 2004 in Indonesia, when a 9.1 magnitude earthquake created the single most devastating tsunami in recorded history. There are reports that the waves reached 30 feet tall and engulfed entire 3-story buildings. And in all, the tsunami claimed over 227,000 lives and caused $10 billion worth of damage. For me, this brings several questions to mind. The first being, how do you respond to such a disaster? 2, how can you coordinate the number of people in organizations that are inevitably going to want to help? And 3, why do we need to shine a new light on this issue now, more so than in the past? So starting with question 3, the U.S. Geological Survey has found that natural disasters are occurring more frequently and are increasing in severity due to climate change, which means not only things like tsunamis, but other natural disasters like hurricanes and tornadoes are going to be occurring more often and getting worse. I've also found in my personal experience that many large organizations cannot effectively coordinate during large-scale operations like this. So these 2 topics really drove my research question for this project, which was, how do differences in organizational culture impact interagency coordination and communication during large-scale disaster relief operations? So this project was designed to investigate ways that you could identify the problems associated with a multi-agency response and to develop new problem-solving methods that can reduce the significance of these problems. So my goal would be to take what I learned in this project, as well as my experience in both the US Navy as well as civilian emergency medicine, into medical school, and then return to naval service as an officer and a physician to influence how the Navy responds to these types of disasters and how they interact with other organizations. I decided to organize my research project into a portfolio, which consisted of a literature review, professional interviews, a commentary on the book Waves of Hope, planning a term paper from my EHS 301 class, which was Planning Emergency Health Services, and then finally, to tie everything together, the scholarship of interdisciplinarity behind this project. So I initially started with my literature review, where I was looking to find whether organizational culture does influence an organization or agency's ability to effectively coordinate and communicate. And I found many studies that supported this, 2 of them in particular. The first was a study done at Cornell University, which found that organizational culture has a very large impact on collaboration between large companies. Now, this study was done predominantly on large tech companies and joint ventures, but I found that a lot of their findings were applicable to disaster relief agencies as well. Another study, which focused very much on the military side of coordination, was done by a retired Navy commander, and he identified many different problems associated with military coordination, and he indicated that cultural self-awareness is the first step in achieving success in these operations. So I then went on to investigate what professionals in the field were currently experiencing. So I conducted semi-structured interviews with 2 professionals who work in this interagency sort of field or have worked in this field. One, a naval officer, and then the other, a member of USAID, who have both functioned as sort of liaisons between different organizations. And although the backgrounds of each interviewee varied quite significantly, I actually found that they agreed on the fact that interorganizational communication is an underdeveloped field of study, And they both also agree that this topic can have significant impact on disaster response operations in the future. I then moved on to investigating a specific disaster to try to identify problems associated with this coordinated disaster relief and if there were any overarching themes that seemed to appear. I did this by investigating the US Navy War College's account of the response to the Indonesia tsunami. It was a book called Waves of Hope. And again, I use this to identify and target specific struggles associated with coordinated disaster response. I then went on to reevaluate the term paper that I had written for EHS 301, the Planning Emergency Health Services class. And this class pulled very much on what's called a SWOT analysis, or a strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats analysis. And we use this to evaluate a emergency health system of our choosing for, again, their strengths, their weaknesses, and opportunities, and to come up with a plan moving into the future in which they could capitalize on their strengths and also help to overcome some of their weaknesses. Reflecting back on that same article that was written by the retired US Navy commander, I realized that a SWOT analysis can be used not only to evaluate your own organization's capabilities, but to also evaluate your organization culturally to find areas of weakness within your own interagency coordination and communication, because that cultural self-awareness was the first step in accomplishing these missions and overcoming these challenges. So the major problems that I identified with this coordinated disaster response were differing leadership and communication styles. A perfect example of that is the vertical chain of command structure of the US Navy versus the much more horizontal leadership structure of a lot of civilian organizations. I also found that differing conflict resolution methods also caused issues as well. For example, many organizations chose a stand your grounds type of mentality. Others chose a compromising mentality. And this was entirely dependent on the organization's culture. And what was interesting to me was that these conflict resolution methods, if you had two organizations using different methods, they were actually in conflict with each other and kind of had a opposite effect. Another problem was differing professional languages. In particular, I put acronyms in here because the military is infamous for their overuse of acronyms, and it can create a lot of miscommunication if one organization doesn't understand a specific acronym. And even other phrases or words can have different meanings depending on which organization you're actually functioning with. Another issue that was common was recognizing patient need and using that to direct manpower and logistics. So this was very much the ability of the physicians and the healthcare responders to coordinate medicine to logisticians to ensure that the right supplies got to the right place at the right time, which is key in a lot of these disaster responses, because time is what saves or costs lives. Which leads right into the last problem that I found, which was logistical capability as a whole. Did organizations have the ability to provide their resources to the people who needed them or not? The disciplinary perspectives that I chose to approach these problems from were psychology and sociology, where I looked a lot at organizational culture, group dynamics, and human behavior. I used modern language and linguistics for intercultural communication techniques, as well as conflict resolution techniques. Emergency health services, again, provided me with that SWOT analysis, but it also provided me with a baseline understanding of disaster response operations, how they're planned and how they're actually conducted. And then science, technology, engineering, and math was used in a way to connect not only doctors with the planners and logisticians, but also doctors with other professionals that are responding. For example, in a lot of post-disaster situations, there are virologists or infectious disease professionals that respond to evaluate the long-term health concerns of the affected population post-disaster. So having this common language of science that doctors are able to speak with these other professionals and then communicate on to the logisticians allows them to plan for example, antibiotics to be delivered to the right place if you think that infection is going to be a problem, or respirators or other supplies and equipment. The scholarship of interdisciplinarity was the last piece of this project that tied everything together. And I used the common ground strategy of redefinition, which involved restructuring the definition of culture So traditionally, culture is defined as the characteristics and knowledge of a particular group of people, encompassing language, religion, cuisine, and social habits. And I found that this definition very much applied to a large population of people within a geographic area, a very traditional style of what we imagine culture to be. But if you redefine the definition of culture into the context of an organization, and you say that culture, an organization's culture is the shared beliefs and values that are established by leaders and then communicated and reinforced through various methods, which ultimately shape employee perceptions, behaviors, and understanding of the organization. You can then start to apply a lot of these methodologies from sociology and psychology, as well as modern language and linguistics, to scenarios in which two organizations are interacting with each other, much in the way two different cultures may interact with each other. I also use the bridging strategy, building complex and multi-causal explanations, which was really used to predict patient need with logistical response. So for example, if you know that a certain type of injury is going to be prevalent within a certain disaster, you can begin to predict what types of equipment and supplies you're going to need to provide aid to those patients and streamline the process of getting all of those resources there in a timely manner, which again is what ends up saving lives because time ends up becoming a critical component of these operations. So I found that implementation of these strategies will allow organizations not only to prepare for the challenges that they may encounter during these multi-agency response operations, but also to quickly adapt to new problems as they arise. So what I found is that an organization's culture does in fact impact its ability to communicate and coordinate. And these interdisciplinary concepts can help to identify and solve some of the problems associated with coordinated relief operations. And it is my goal to take this knowledge along with my background in civilian emergency medicine and my experience in the Navy onto medical school and then back into a career in the Navy as an officer where I can hopefully influence change in the way the Navy responds to these different events. Thank you.
Thank you, Davis. Questions from anyone?
Excellent presentation. Thank you for the work that you've done. My question would be, is there a significance of the lighthouse in the opening and closing slide?
Yes, actually. So the lighthouse was actually chosen because of my background within the Navy. Lighthouses have significance to sailors around the world in the sense of not only do they guide us in our navigation, but they're also critical in pointing out potential hazards that may lie in front of us. So this idea of using this capstone research to look forward into the future of disaster response operations with my return to naval service very much guided my way, very much like a lighthouse guides the way of sailors when they're sailing.
Patricia, please. I think you're on mute, Patricia.
Hi. I enjoyed your presentation immensely. And I particularly resonated to your slide on the problems that you identified. And it occurred to me that you would be an excellent consultant to governmental agencies. And I think all of your points are well taken, and sometimes they could just take one of those and improve the communication immensely. And I heard that one of the mandates that President Biden gave to his staff when he was doing his latest speech was no acronyms. No acronyms. So I just throw that out there. I know you have a lot on your plate between now and your goal, but along the way.
Thank you. I actually haven't ruled out the idea of potentially pursuing a master's degree in emergency health services or disaster response and potentially functioning in that role as well. And that may be in the future, maybe after my return to Navy medicine when I'm looking for something else to do after I retire from the Navy, but definitely something I'm considering. Thank you.
After you retire from the Navy, oh my goodness, that just frightens me to even think about it. Other questions?
I can read my question that I put in the chat. It's
Oh, I'm sorry, I missed that. Please do.
related to the earlier point. As you point out, the communication is harder when you have a limited time to mediate that communication. So what ideas do you have about bridging that? So one could be no acronyms, but I guess what else do you imagine would be a relatively straightforward strategy without changing anybody's culture, right? But maybe helping them see the other perspective.
That's actually that's a surprisingly difficult question to answer without changing culture significantly. I think that if there was an adopted universal language in disaster response, which is started to become developed, but if there's this universal language where when you say one specific term, everybody knows exactly what that term implies. Another potential solution that I saw was, again, taken from my experience in the military with leadership. A lot of times in the military, with that vertical chain of command structure that we have a single person that's in charge, and they have very much a understanding of everything that's happening at every level of their organization. And a lot of times that's not the same case with civilian organizations. A lot of times they have multiple people in charge of different areas depending on what you actually need an answer to. So a lot of times to streamline that communication, taking a playbook from the military by having one person as almost a designated point of contact that has an overview of every aspect of their organization can really help to streamline those communication processes instead of having to bounce around from person to person to get the information that you actually need right away.
Yeah, I like that idea. I was even thinking related to Andrew's presentation earlier, right? There almost should be an app that connects you to the right people in right organization and that translates the vocabulary for every acronym from one organization to another. Great, thank you.
Now you can see why we love Dr. Starsgiano on the ISC. Becca, was that you asking about the lighthouse? We're a divided opinion. I think I heard your voice and the others were worried you had a question.
Oh no, that wasn't my question. I had a
Beg
different
your pardon.
one.
You go.
I was wondering how your personal experience in the Navy and EMS influenced your project, if at all.
Absolutely. My time in the Navy and in civilian EMS played a huge role in my project, very much in guiding my research. So those two topics that I had mentioned in the beginning, as far as the drivers behind my research question, they were the drivers behind my research question, but the driver behind me wanting to accomplish or to complete this research was very much my time in the Navy and a desire to return to the naval service to improve upon the experiences that I had for the most effective response that we could actually provide to those in need.
Thank you. I'm getting a little out of order, but there are actually 3 different versions of that question. So well asked, and thank you for reflecting on that. Joby, you had a question, right?
Yeah, I'll make a couple comments and I'll apologize. I have some folks working at the house, so if you hear banging, I apologize. But first, Davis, want to just thank you for bringing me along on this journey with you. I've learned a lot, and to folks in the INDS community, just say, boy, I just think this exemplifies kind of the potential of INDS to just bring curious and really engaged students, and then have a process and a structure for them to move through. We watched this shift from kind of more traditional pre-med to thinking of intercultural medicine, which is its own unique interdisciplinary challenge, to this interorganizational disaster relief and thinking about agency and organizational culture. And that was really led by Davis's expanding sense of the challenges. It was very much a kind of problem-solving, solutions-oriented investigation that led him on this journey. And I just think without an INDS structure, it'd be so hard to be able to do that, particularly in undergrad. So I'd say congrats, you've really done graduate level work here, and both with professional implications. And I think we need to make sure the med schools understand the value of you bringing that non-traditional approach to this. So that's one kind of immediate challenge that we want to help you with. I'll also just say, one of your interviewees, Brad Arsenault, whose career USAID served in the Peace Corps with me 30 years ago, and we've been close kind of colleagues and friends since. So I've really appreciated how these really different cultural takes on how you work in complex settings has come together in your work. And I see Commander Kozlowski is here. And Steve and I remember one of our conversations that Davis pulled us together for. We played this out in micro, where, I was saying from Schreiber Center perspective, working in Baltimore, and from a Peace Corps international development perspective, working abroad, I go into a setting and I think like my watchword is, don't just do something, sit there. It's like, listen, and don't start asking who's in charge, like allow it to emerge. And you're like, from your perspective saying like, how, the confusion of not knowing who's in charge or not knowing what the end goal of the mission is. And I think that, one conversation, we realized like what the impact of organizational cultures can have. And we know that the scale and frequency of disaster settings is, we have to expect that this will be rising. So Davis, I'll just say I not only appreciate the work you've done, I think you've tapped a gap that is of global consequence as well as local consequence. And I guess if I had a question, it would be,
Dr. Taylor, I am so sorry, but we have
We're
reached the point where we need to move on to the next guy. But thank you ever so much for that
Stop.
input.
I
Much
apologize for
appreciated.
taking so much
Not a
time.
problem. Not a problem.